Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Game Club. I'm Graham.
And I'm George.
All right, George, we're going to do something pretty fun today. We are going to talk about why Dragon's Dogma 2 should have multiplayer. Now, I know, obviously, the game will not have multiplayer. At least that's what Capcom has told us so far. But I think there's a lot of argument that can be made why it should have multiplayer. And we're going to take some of the best counter arguments of why people don't want multiplayer, why it shouldn't be there, all that stuff. We've gone from across the internet, down from the smallest couple of upvotes or likes up to the biggest multi-hundred upvote and liked arguments as to why the game shouldn't have multiplayer, and we're going to take them all down. However, as biased as I am, we want to make sure that we represent all of these arguments as in full as possible. So we're just going to kind of go through them. We're going to talk about what the merits are, or maybe take an argument that was not very well described and just kind of expand on their argument to see where their perspective may be, and then we'll give our reasoning as to why the argument doesn't really hold up under scrutiny.
Sure, let's do it.
All right, sweet. So, from a technical perspective, it's not possible, or it requires too much time and money to implement multiplayer. Yeah, so this one's a pretty easy debunk. They have a handful of games in the RE engine, which is the same engine that Dragon's Dogma 2 uses, that have multiplayer. In fact, Monster Hunter has 2 games in the RE engine. They have multiplayer. They also have 4 players total in a game. So I don't really see a reason why they couldn't. Obviously, not a copy and paste job of just taking the netcode from one to the other, but you can pretty easily move those systems over to Dragon's Dogma 2 without the need of making new netcode or implementing netcode in the RE engine for the first time. So when it comes to bringing this in as a possibility, it's absolutely possible. It's not an impossibility. When it comes to if it requires too much time and money to implement, I mean, it's not really going to be that big of a deal because a lot of these systems and these problems are already solved.
Sure, and what would you say to someone who's worried that, like, okay, yeah, fair enough, maybe it's not a huge time and money investment, but it's definitely not zero. There is still some time and money required, and maybe the game is 10% shorter, or certain things of it have not been fleshed out as much as they could. What would you say to someone like that?
Yeah, that's a pretty good rebuttal, but I would say overall, if you're going to implement something as important as multiplayer into a game, especially one that's built kind of around that, I think having multiplayer, even if you do lose 10%, is a big enough gain to justify the loss. Obviously, I think it would suck if we did lose stuff in Dragon's Dogma, even just 10%, but honestly, the multiplayer gain is absolutely huge. It's like sacrificing 10% to gain 100% back, in my opinion. So while it is a decent rebuttal, I think, we're going to gain more than we lost.
Sure, that's fair. That's fair.
All right, so the next one we've got here is the game just wouldn't work from a gameplay perspective in multiplayer.
Yeah, I don't know what to say about this one. I mean, It's
Yeah.
pretty clear that multiplayer elements have been included with the pawns and stuff, so
Right.
I don't know what to say on that one.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly made from the ground up. There's synergistic stuff, abilities and spells in the game. There's, as you said, it's built from the ground up with a group of 4 with pawns, so there's really no reason why they can't just swap pawns out for other players. It just makes sense.
Yeah, the only thing is, if I'm being as gracious as I possibly can to an argument like this, it's that a player is much more skilled than an NPC. Now, clearly, there's ways around that, but that's the best argument I could be. It's like, okay, sure, fair enough, but an NPC will still play drastically different than a player would.
Yeah, true. I mean, you could just make it so when players come in the game, they're going to have extra buffs on enemies like HP and maybe a little bit of attack, but just mostly HP to kind of combat the fact that players will be dealing more damage because they're just more skilled.
Yeah, I figured you'd say something like that. It doesn't invalidate, right, the fact that there's workarounds against having more skilled players on the team, for sure.
All right, yeah, great little counterpoint there. All right, so another one is, this one's really weird. There's no demand for multiplayer, and therefore it should not be in the game.
I think these individuals are living under a rock. Like, I mean, we just went through like Reddit posts and some other stuff to see like what people were saying, and there's a demand. So I don't know.
Right.
I don't know where those people have been.
Yeah, I mean, you can basically go anywhere online and you'll see tons of people clamoring for multiplayer. I mean, they made a whole MMO out of it, and it didn't, it lasted for 4 years before they shut it down. I think the MMO had other problems with it that wasn't just related to, people not wanting a Dragon's Dogma multiplayer game. I think there were other systematic, fundamental issues. But generally, I mean, people do want multiplayer, and I think that's not really a reason not to have it because there's clearly demand.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, I don't want multiplayer, or I don't want to have to play multiplayer. Well, I mean, the great thing about that is you don't have to play multiplayer. You can just continue to play the game as per usual and totally ignore the multiplayer experience.
Yeah, the main thing I could say to someone who says they don't want to have to play multiplayer, like if I'm going to steel man that argument, I picture an individual who wants to play the game single player because it gives them a certain experience or a certain vibe, yet they're friends with individuals who would ruin that vibe, yet they're not it's many people are unable to say no to their friends. It's not necessarily that uncommon. I would think you should be more strong-willed than that, but there are individuals out there who would rather have the game make that decision for them. Maybe they're friends that they love them to death, but they're goofballs, and getting in a 4-player party to play Dragon's Dogma with them would ruin the experience that they're seeking.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much I can say to that other than just say no to your friends if they're going to do stuff like that. Personally, I wouldn't play with people who are going to ruin my game experience, especially because you can attack NPCs and stuff in Dragon's Dogma. So, I mean, just don't play with those kind of people and or at least just tell them that, hey, man, I want to have more of a standard experience. Or, just don't play in multiplayer, just play with your pawns.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, just because you want the game to take the choice away from you shouldn't really mean that it should take it away from everyone else.
Right.
So,
all right, another one we have here is they would sell hats and it would make me upset to have battle passes, microtransactions, things like this. On the surface, this seems like it's a decent argument, but then if you really start to think of what the core problem is, it's not a co-op problem that causes these things to happen because, I mean, you can look at games like Honkai Star Rail. While they are a free-to-play game, they do have things like a battle pass and certainly microtransactions. The biggest thing is it's not about co-op, it's about the company. If the company is greedy and they want to have all these things, they're going to find ways to put it in even if you have a single-player game. There's plenty of examples of tons of single-player games that have a bunch of microtransactions, battle passes, all sorts of nonsense. I mean, just look at the typical Ubisoft game. And then you can see that it's really not about the game itself, it's about the company that houses it. And the question is, do you trust Capcom to not go and ruin the experiences with those things? And I think they've shown that they do a pretty good job of that, so.
Yeah, just because a game is single player doesn't necessarily mean it won't be ruined by a greedy company. There's plenty of examples of single player games ruined by the company itself because of their greediness.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, I don't know where this one comes from exactly, but this is an argument we've seen quite a bit, which is, I don't want the pawn system to be removed. I don't know initially where people got the idea that adding in multiplayer would remove the pawn system, but I mean, I don't think I've ever seen someone say that they want multiplayer because they want the pawn system to be removed. I don't think it's ever been an argument on the other side, the pro multiplayer side. So I don't know exactly where the anti-multiplayer people get this kind of argument. And I mean, the answer is basically, well, you just wouldn't remove the pawn system because why would you remove it? It's already made, it's already there. Just add multiplayer, and if you want to play single player, play with the pawns. No biggie.
Yeah, this might be somewhat of a stretch, but if I'm trying to be as gracious as possible, this sounds to me like maybe someone believes, this isn't just something they believe in isolation. They accept the fact that, oh, well, the time or money investment to include multiplayer would be such that other parts of the game would have to suffer much more, kind of to the first point that we mentioned. And maybe at some point, the game devs would have to make a choice between multiplayer or pawn. Maybe I'm being too gracious to individuals who try and make that leap. But that's the best, if I'm trying to steel man this, that's the best I can provide.
And I think there'll be a decent counter argument if that was their counter argument, but I think a lot of people just repeat this because someone came up with the idea that it would be removed and people keep echoing it. So I don't think they're giving that much thought to it, to be honest. And even if it was the case, I don't think there's ever a world where even if we did get multiplayer, that the pawn system would be removed anyway. So I think generally it's a pretty moot argument.
Yeah, and exactly. Like I don't think anyone's requesting for the pawn system to be removed that wants multiplayer. So it's just,
yeah, I mean, even
what can
me,
you do?
who doesn't even like or use the pawn system, I do not think it should be removed. Like, absolutely not. It should stay in the game forever. But I don't care to use it at all. So, I mean, it is what it is.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. If you don't like pawns, you shouldn't play Dragon's Dogma. Oh, well, would you look at here? Here's an exact thing of what I was saying. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't like the pawn system, so maybe I shouldn't play Dragon's Dogma. George, what do you think about that?
Yeah, man, get out of here. Let only the purists and gatekeepers play the game. What are you doing?
I mean, it's
Get
such
away
a
from
bizarre,
this game.
right? It's such a bizarre thing to say. Like, okay, well, you can enjoy Dragon's Dogma in any way that you want. You can enjoy it with 2 pawns or 3 pawns or 1 pawn or just by yourself. Like, who's to say that you shouldn't enjoy Dragon's Dogma in any way that you want? And in fact, the developers also feel the same way. They literally have augments in the game for if you're being solo, I think it's from the Assassin, that you get buffs. I think it's 30% buffs to your HP or attack or different stats like that help you to play the game if you just want to play it by yourself. Not to mention the fact that I have done at least half a dozen playthroughs all the way from the beginning to Bitter Black Isle with different vocations, and I had a great time. I've literally never played the game with pawns before, at least for the most part, and I will continue to do so in Dragon's Dogma 2. I just wish it could have been in multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, multiplayer just gives people an additional way to play the game. It doesn't really detract from people who enjoy playing with the pawns, any number of pawns, or even no pawns like you did. So, yeah, I think this is a bit of a silly one as well.
A meta would form, and honestly, it would hurt my feelings.
Yeah, trying to seal man an argument like that, the main thing that I can think of is true. Metas, unfortunately, do happen to form in some games. Whenever you play online, if the build that you will enjoy playing and the way you enjoy playing the game is somehow suboptimal, a certain section of the player base, I'm not saying all, or even most, but there will be a section of the player base that will hate on you. And so now this individual is forced to disengage from a system in the game that they otherwise would have wanted to enjoy. And yeah, like it is kind of an emotional reaction, right? Like, oh, people are hating on me, now I'm not having fun. It does hurt their feelings, but it would still suck to not be able to engage with that part of the multiplayer.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I don't think if there was multiplayer, there would be matchmaking at the very least. I think you would have to open up your world and people could maybe look at a server list and join your world that way. So I don't think you'd have to worry too much about getting matched up with randoms. You could just go and play with whoever you want, and if you find jerks, you just stop playing with them, and maybe there could be a block feature even. And the other thing is, like, I think this game would be the most fun with friends when you're talking with them, when you're coordinating abilities. Hey, you know, jump on my back and or my shield and I'll push you up and you can get an aerial attack. And hey, I'm casting this spell, come cast it with me, or whatever it may be. I think that's the best way to do it, just like kind of how you communicate with your pawns. So, I don't know, don't play with jerks, but you can't let other people coordinate 100% of how you want to play the game. You just need to play how you want to play and have your own fun. And if you can't have fun with any people online, then there's always the pawn system to fall back to.
Yeah, that's kind of the biggest rebuttal thing, right? It's the pawn system isn't going away, and especially like you said with no matchmaking, like this argument becomes much weaker because then you have much more freedom as to how and who you want to engage with online.
Right.
But yeah, no, that's fair.
All right, how would loot work? Well, I mean, it would just work the same way all loot works in every other multiplayer game. You either have shared loot that you can trade, or you can have non-shared loot and no trading. This stuff has been solved like a million different times. Honestly, it was very confusing listening to someone make the argument that loot just wouldn't work in this game when it's pretty clearly solved in like a million other multiplayer games with loot.
Yeah, I don't really know how to seal man this one. This person's clearly living in 1999 where this hasn't really been solved yet. But yeah, that's probably one of the silliest ones. I'm almost like tempted to think it's a troll, to be honest. Like that's a problem that's been solved in so many games already. But yeah, that's something we actually heard, guys.
Yep.
People actually said that.
Yeah, I mean, I will go on to what George is saying. These are actually real arguments that we heard. In fact, the reason I want to emphasize that, because this next one is absolutely bonkers. So yeah, get a load of this. This is a real thing someone actually argued. Adding netcode would make the game as big as an MMO because netcode is what inflates the storage requirements in MMO games. Huh?
Yeah. Let's just move on. That was a troll too.
Like, that's gotta be a troll, right?
I don't even know what to say to that. Yeah,
Like-
these are legitimate things we heard. I mean, it's a legitimate concern, I guess, if that person does think it will make the game giant, but they're just like flat out wrong. I don't even know what else to say to that one.
Yeah, that one's really bizarre. Just so everyone knows, netcode is not the thing that makes your game big. Netcode in and of itself is just code, and code is very small. It's assets, audios, animations. Those are the things that makes games really big. MMOs have a lot of areas and a lot of abilities and animations and audio and all that stuff, and that's why they're so big. It's not actually the netcode. As goofy as that sounds, I know I'm sure a lot of people are just shaking their head. But yeah, it's not going to inflate the size of the game, so we wouldn't have to worry about that.
Yep.
All right, so let's get into a couple of stronger arguments. These other ones we've been going through have been kind of weaker arguments, but here's two. We've got two really decent ones. We got one kind of mid-strength one and one pretty decently strong one. So the mid one is the game lore makes no sense with two Arrisen. Now, I hesitate to even say that this is kind of a mid-argument because a lot of this can be hand-waved away and just say, well, it's a video game, don't think about it too hard. But I do want to agree a little bit with there is some lore kind of suspension of disbelief that goes into having two Arrisen there. There are ways around this by having the multiplayer component only have things like pawns, so you come in as pawns, but that would limit your ability to play as hybrid classes, so I don't really see that as a full solution. So honestly, the only thing I can really think of is, don't think about it too hard. It is just a game. Look at games like Overwatch. They dealt with this by saying, there's two Tracers on the team or on opposite sides of the team, and Tracer's working with Widowmaker. Just don't think about it too hard. It's just a game. The lore is a little bit separate from the gameplay itself, and so I would imagine we'd look at it the same way like that.
Yeah, I do think this is a bit of a stronger one too, and part of the reason you kind of touched on it because suspension of disbelief is kind of subjective, right? Like they're two individuals who could watch the same show and the same movie, and one person thoroughly enjoys it, and the other person's like, wait, like hold on, like this was riddled with plot holes. Like what are you talking about? Star Wars 9 was actually good. It was actually a good movie, okay? I don't want you talking bad about it.
Who's saying that?
Like,
I refuse to believe those people exist.
They exist, trust me, man. In every corner of the internet, there are individuals who do that. So it's a very, very subjective thing, right? Your suspension of disbelief, and how much it's such a hard thing to articulate, because it's not like, oh well, this person was born with 8 points in their suspension of disbelief and this person was born with 4, right? It's just like a very subjective thing, and if that ends up ruining the single player experience for someone, kind of sucks, right? Like it's just the reality of it. But at the same time, I don't know, I think people who lean that way are few and far between. Not just saying because there's less people of a certain type that makes the argument less strong, but I do think that there is such a demand for multiplayer that giving people that option and taking it away for something like that is not strong enough, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I think it's a good perspective you've put on it. All right, so the biggest and greatest argument that we have against having multiplayer in Dragon's Dogma 2 actually comes from Itsuno itself, and we've seen a lot of people say like, oh, Itsuno's vision, he doesn't want multiplayer, and Itsuno Vision says it has to be only single player. And so that was the biggest hurdle that we had to overcome. We started looking at a lot of interviews, we started looking at a lot of quotes and seeing what he really said, but it's not really totally his full argument.
Yeah, I actually want to read just a couple paragraphs here from one of the interviews that we found from him. We went through a lot, and some of these themes repeat, but I think this one really exemplifies kind of his repeating message. And he says there's 2 reasons why it's not full-on multiplayer. The first is that, well, there's so many multiplayer games out there, and if we made it full-on multiplayer, we didn't think that it would stand out as much. The second reason is that, personally, I think that multiplayer limits your playing time. For example, you have to set up a time to play with your friends. You can't really play when you want to play. You have to work around everybody else's schedule. I didn't really like that. I wanted to play a game I wanted to play without having to worry about anybody else, but I still wanted to keep those network functions and the internet, that idea of multiplayer in the game. This kind of indirect multiplayer is what I chose to do to in the end. To still have that multiplayer aspect in the game while being able to freely play whenever I want. So really, like, if we boil down what he's saying is he wanted that multiplayer feel without the cons. He wanted all the pros without the cons of multiplayer.
Yeah, and I think, you know, he's talking here about the pawn system, right? Like, the pawns in the game are this solution to having some of the best parts of multiplayer without having any of the restrictions, so just being able to keep things as your paced as possible in a single-player game. And I honestly think this is an incredible argument for why the pawn system is so great. You're able to really get that full party feel, you're able to customize NPCs, you're able to make the party what you want it to be. I think it's great, and I totally agree with him. However, his vision is very specifically on providing a solution to a single-player game of adding in multiplayer without any of the detriments. His argument and vision isn't against multiplayer, it's about a positive to the single-player aspect. So I don't think that this bars any kind of future update or really any kind of Dragon's Dogma Online or Dragon's Dogma 2 Online or whatever. I don't think it bars any of that. It's not an argument against having multiplayer, and I think this is why we should be having multiplayer in the game, because it doesn't inflict with that vision, right? It's just an explanation for why the pawn system exists and not a reason for us to not have multiplayer. They don't really conflict from a kind of ideological perspective. His vision for the game is not anti-multiplayer, it's pro single-player solutions.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit it there at the end there, right? It's a kind of nuanced distinction between the two, and it's not like these are things that can't cohabitate together, right? The pawn system alongside multiplayer.
Right.
And one provides the solution to take away all the cons of multiplayer if you didn't want to engage with them. But if you did, you have the option to do so with multiplayer while also bringing the full pros that come with multiplayer.
Right, and there's so many great pros that come with multiplayer, and I acknowledge that there's some cons as well, but I think overall the game will be way, way better as a result. I mean, think about it. Imagine playing Monster Hunter World with no multiplayer. Monster Hunter World was huge. It was a massive, massive success. It was a massive game, and I think in large part because of multiplayer. I know tons of people that have told me, I want to play Monster Hunter World, but I have no one to play with, or it's not as fun to play solo, and I think that's 100% on the money. Monster Hunter is a fun game, but Monster Hunter with friends is a whole nother world of enjoyment, and I think if we could get multiplayer in Dragon's Dogma, I think we would see an explosion of popularity with Dragon's Dogma, just like we saw with Monster Hunter World. I do think Dragon's Dogma 2 will be successful even without the multiplayer, but I think having that multiplayer aspect will bring in a lot more people and a lot more success, and that just means more Dragon's Dogma games in the future. All right, everybody, thank you so much for listening to this hopefully kind of interesting argument for Dragon's Dogma 2 to have multiplayer. I really hope it will, and if you have your own arguments as to why it shouldn't, I would genuinely like to read them in the comments, and then I'll put an angry comment saying why your comment is stupid, and then we'll all increase engagement on this video.
Yes, that's right. We'll take all the angry comments, the hate watches, whatever it is. We definitely do not want any civil discourse down in the comments. That would be bad.
Yeah, just make it civil enough that we don't have to remove your comment, but enough that you enrage other people to inflame more arguments.
Yes, that's right.
All right, great. Well, thanks, everybody. We will see you in the next one.
See ya.
Nice. Ah! Let's freaking go.